I'm joining you from the unceded land of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respects to their elders past and present. I wanted to say a few words before handing over to my fellow National Co-Convener Sarah Buckley and partner in crime, who'll be your host for this really important conversation. As many of you know, Sarah is the CEO of the Trawalla Foundation and Chief of Staff to Carol Schwartz AO. What some of you may not know is that this covers a broad portfolio of leading gender equity initiatives across politics, media, policy, and capital. And in addition to her role with Pathways, involves leading the Women's Leadership Institute Australia and co-leading the female-led venture portfolio. Sarah has previously been a sought-after sustainability consultant to major Australian companies, led PwC's award-winning corporate responsibility team, and held senior roles creating innovative new businesses, including PwC's Indigenous Consulting. I know all of this. I want you to know all of this. As we all know, for women in public life, being online comes with very real challenges: harassment, threats, and the kind of sustained pressure that makes many women pull back from the spaces where their voices matter most. Sarah has devoted her career to systems change and is profoundly aware that the onus should never be on the individual woman to address these challenges. Major regulatory and platform changes are urgently needed in Australia and internationally, and Sarah is playing a crucial and critical role in advocacy to make these structural reforms happen. But she understands better than most that change takes time. So her priority has been to find practical ways to support you so you feel equipped and not alone. At Pathways to Politics, making politics safer for women is not an afterthought, it's a program principle. And this is because of Sarah's leadership. Over to you, Sarah.
Oh, thank you so much, ma'am. I really appreciate that introduction. And right back at you, my partner in crime. It's a pretty amazing model having us co-leading Pathways to Politics together. I wanted to add my own acknowledgement of country and particularly honour First Nations female leaders who continue to stand up and advocate for their communities. I also want to thank our founding partner, the University of Melbourne, and the national team who helped develop this event, Erin, Rachel, and Mem, and our new Pathways Alum Engagement Coordinator, Lara Stevenson. Welcome, Lara. I wanted to acknowledge our 7 other wonderful university partners, QUT, UNSW, Charles Darwin University, and the Universities of Adelaide, Canberra, Tasmania, and Western Australia. So tonight is about showing up in public life, in your communities, and online. We all know social media is not optional for women in politics. It is how you reach your community, how you campaign, how you stay visible between elections. And we also know, unfortunately, it comes at a cost. At Pathways to Politics, making politics safer for women matters. We hear directly from alum about what it actually feels like to step forward, and we've shaped our response around that lived experience. Over the last 2.5 years, that's meant engaging with the world-leading e-safety commissioner and rolling out social media self-defense workshops for hundreds of alum. It's now embedded into every cohort training. There are lots of different safety resources on our Knowledge Hub, and civility training has been built into many of our programs. And last year, through the Women's Leadership Institute Australia, we made Social Protect free for our entire alum community. So it's available to all of you on tonight's Zoom. That was made possible by Shane, who provided the license at cost and made it unlimited so that every alum and their family and friends can access it. So what is Social Protect? It's a purpose-built app founded in Australia that uses AI to detect and delete abusive comments in real time across your social media accounts in over 100 languages. You download it, it connects your accounts, and it works in the background. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up, and it doesn't require you to share your social media login details. You'll hear more about how it works tonight, but the short version is It filters out what you should never have to read. It keeps a record you can review, and it gives you back time and headspace to focus on the actual work. So that is the goal. Not, unfortunately, that the problem disappears, but that you have practical tools to manage it and that you don't have to figure it out alone. So one more thing just before I introduce our panelists. At Pathways to Politics, we introduced Georgie to Social Protect at a time when things online have become particularly difficult for her. And she agreed to pilot it, and her feedback was unequivocal. It was transformational for her well-being, her capacity to engage with her community, and her ability to do her job. And so it was Georgie's experience, her feedback, and her willingness to advocate for the tool publicly that was instrumental in our decision to make it available to our entire alum community. And we're enormously grateful to her for that. So thank you, Georgie. So let me formally introduce our three speakers, and I'll start with Georgie Purcell MP, who was a member of the Victorian Legislative Council for the Animal Justice Party, representing Northern Victoria, and she's the youngest woman in the Victorian Parliament. She's a Pathways to Politics alum and one of the most innovative and effective users of social media in Australian politics. Her online presence is central to how she governs a vast regional electorate and builds genuine community connection. Georgie has also been one of the most courageous and outspoken voices in the country on the reality of online abuse and misogyny for women in public life. You may have seen her recent thoughtful commentary in response to an appalling billboard and mobile truck campaign featuring the slogan "Ditch the Witch," targeting Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen. Many of you will also remember the dress she wore to Parliament on International Women's Day in 2023, printed with the actual abusive comments directed at her. It was a powerful and unforgettable act of public advocacy. So welcome, Georgie. Shane Britton's career reads rather like a thriller. Director of 2 Australian intelligence agencies, deployed to 47 countries, building counter-terrorism capabilities and working on some of the most significant legislative reforms in the history of the Australian intelligence community. He left government, led a multinational software firm, and then something much closer to home changed his direction entirely, and Social Protect was born. It now operates in 9 countries, and some of its most striking growth has been in sport, where individual athletes and clubs are using it to protect players, particularly women, from the kind of sustained abuse that has driven some of the world's most prominent sporting figures off social media entirely. So welcome to you, Shane. And finally, Hayley van Loon, who is CEO of Crime Stoppers International and founder of Magnolia Intelligence. She began her career in the Australian intelligence community and has spent nearly 2 decades advising governments, corporates, and multilateral organisations on counter-terrorism, insider risk, organised crime, and digital safety. After nearly a decade in the United States, working at the intersection of security, technology, and strategy, she returned to Australia in 2023 with a renewed focus on sovereign capability and public impact. She's also a Pathways to Politics alum, and her speech to our Victorian graduating cohort earlier this year, "When women succeed in public life, Australia succeeds," says everything about why she is here tonight. Hayley, welcome to you as well. Fantastic. So really looking forward to this conversation. And I'm going to start with you, Georgie. As I outlined, you're known for social media that genuinely connects, creative, direct, and clearly central to how you represent a huge regional electorate. So what does social media unlock for you as a politician?
Yeah, look, hi everyone. I just need to warn, I bragged that I put my baby down and she fell asleep and then she woke back up. So apologies if she makes some interruptions throughout this. Social media is incredible for me in so many ways because I represent the largest electorate in the upper house. It takes up about half of the state of Victoria, and it's just not possible to physically service that when you're a crossbencher with small staffing and obviously have family commitments and all the other parliamentary duties. So we really rely on social media and the digital space to connect with the communities that we represent and are advocating for. And it's great for that part. We rely on it. And of course, social media is the key communication tool for most politicians now. But certainly what it has unlocked for me is a dark side where the more my profile has grown and the more my advocacy has spread, and I've become more well known, it has resulted in an escalation of threats and abuse and sort of online gendered violence. And that makes it really difficult to manage how you do the work, because obviously we want to show all of the many different things that we're doing, and what we're achieving in Parliament and out there in the community. But it was always a way up of whether or not it was worth it talking about a certain issue. It was a balance against, I guess, how I was mentally feeling at the time when we would be particularly raising difficult matters. And it's something I think that um, a lot of parliamentarians just don't fully understand, because that's not their reality, particularly sort of the MPs who wouldn't traditionally receive that kind of feedback or commentary. I think for me as well, part of my, I guess, success on social media, which feels weird to say, is that, yes, middle-aged white men, correct, has been the fact that I'm different. And I think that's a really good thing. And it's something that I wanted to share when I got into politics, because I wanted to change the way that parliaments look and feel. And for young women or people with different pasts and diverse backgrounds could have a place in public life too, and to show that it was possible for them. But for me, because of my differences and the things about me, and I guess probably a lot of the industries and people that I take on, that has resulted in, I guess, strong feedback from the other side that can make managing the job and doing your advocacy really quite difficult.
And Georgie, I mean, I know you had a sense of what that might look like when you were working as a political staffer, but of course, nothing really prepares you for being the target yourself. And I think, for a long time, you really just kept going and tried to not let it impact you. But, what do you think, what was that toll over time, and what did you kind of wish you known going in about the realities of that experience?
I feel like I've got a really good comparison of seeing the stark difference, because I worked for a politician before I was one myself, who was a male politician, and certainly doing similar work and having the same people disagree with him, but disagreeing with him in a very different way that didn't become gendered or sexist or about the way that he looked or spoke or dressed. Or, for me now, it's also my parenting decisions and commentary about my child. And I mean, that's not a surprise to me. There's so much research to show that male politicians are challenged on their policies and their decisions, whereas women just simply are not. And I think it's really important to say that, because often when I talk about online abuse, people say to me, you need to be willing to take feedback. And of course, I'm willing to take feedback. In fact, I know that political debate is a fundamental part of a healthy democracy. But what women are receiving, particularly right now in this political climate, is far from that. And I guess the thing that with pushing on that actually really concerned me the most is how immune to it I became. I knew that what I was reading and hearing and seeing was really wrong, and that it was bad for women and girls across the board. But things that would have completely destabilized me before I was in public life, it was like getting up and reading the newspaper. And that actually probably upset me more than anything else, because it shouldn't be a requirement to become thick-skinned in order to be a woman in politics. I really reject that idea. But what I think was a turning point for me was my profile, I guess, grew quite significantly. And I'm really lucky in that sense for, I've got the largest social media following of anyone in the Victorian Parliament, and I'm on the crossbench, and I think that's great. But it was when the threats and the commentary sort of became, I guess, made me fearful for my safety. And then obviously I got pregnant, and I have a family now, and I realised that I probably need to put some measures and protections in place, which I did try to do previously, and it's actually quite hard. There's a lot of misunderstanding about online abuse and the action you can take for it, of which our laws are really lacking. And that's something that I am constantly talking about and advocating for change in. But in the interim, having tools to limit my exposure to that. It's just so critically important to not just my mental health, but actually my ability to do my job and serve my community. I think we need to remember that online abuse and sexism and receiving that commentary every single day, it actually takes away from the ability to do your job properly in so many different ways, whether you're mentally checked into work or feeling emotionally capable to take on the load. But also for me, it was my staffing and how much they were having to read comments, hide comments, block people, make a report to Parliament Security, send something to police. That takes them away from doing
Relentless, isn't it?
their
Yeah.
jobs. And,
Yeah.
these are taxpayer funded staff, and that's not a good use of their time. And more importantly, it also puts women in politics with a disadvantage, because then we're not spending as much time doing our jobs and, showing that we belong there. So there was a range of reasons, I guess, why I felt I just had to do something about it. And yeah, that was just some
Well,
of them.
let's move on to, what was that answer? And, you wrote really beautifully about it in The Guardian recently. And just to read the quote that you had in there, as we wait for our baby to wake, my partner makes me a coffee and I open an app designed to shield me from the worst of the internet. It has become as routine as checking my emails. So what was it that changed for you with Social Protect?
So obviously, when I spoke to Shane for the first time, who I'm very, very grateful for, he has changed my entire life, and I think my family are very grateful for him as well, because I'm no longer sitting up at all hours of the night worried about, what's going on my accounts. That's another really important thing to say is I felt a real obligation, not just for my own safety and ensuring that I didn't allow that commentary, but also so that my accounts were a safe place for other people to engage on. And then that made me really, really stressed and anxious, not having oversight or coverage of it at all times, to a point it was quite unhealthy. So I obviously connected with Shane, and through Pathways piloted the service, and the impacts were immediate. Just not feeling that constant pull to check my phone every time we posted and see what was on my posts, and to know that for the most part that when we were putting things online, that I could ensure that the page was not going to be perpetuating sort of really harmful commentary, but also that other people would feel safe to engage in that space and share their opinion, that my comment section wasn't turning into a pylon. And, I still, like the article says, I still check Social Protect really regularly, but the key difference is I no longer have that anxiety when I open my phone to check a social media app, wondering what's on there. Having the app for Social Protect installed on my phone allows me to do it at a time where I feel mentally able to take on that load and to read what could be there, and to put the time into it. And if I'm not feeling up to it, then I have that ability to say no, whereas I previously didn't. And a lot of people prior to that, I guess, were saying to me, why don't you just log off for a little bit, or why don't you just, delete the apps from your phone? But that doesn't actually remove the problem. And again, it's only just giving women a disadvantage in not being able to communicate the work that they're doing in politics. So I have, since then, I've been using Protect for about a year now, and I've told a lot of people about it. And there's a number of female MPs who have taken it on off my recommendation. And particularly right now for Facebook, I'm finding that to be one of the most important ways for me to continue to use that platform, because it was becoming so toxic and so difficult to engage in that we were considering taking ourselves away from it for a little while. And yeah, having the stored record of it, again, I still have all the same measures in place to take action. I can still report things to police or to Parliament Security, but it just means that I no longer have that ongoing, I guess, anxiety that I didn't realise how much it was affecting me until I had the ability to control it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I know when Mem and I heard that Social Protect was offering that for you, the sense of relief and, and happiness genuinely for you that we felt that you could, step back into the space in the way that you needed to. It's, yeah, it's really fantastic. So Feel free if you need to step away for a sec. I'm going to
Oh my
ask
gosh, no,
Hayley and some Shane some questions. So
she's
far,
la
she's
she's
been
just
amazing.
laughing if you can hear her.
Hayley, I'm going to bring you in now because since stepping into the CEO role at Crime Stoppers International, you've developed a much higher public profile. And so I'm curious, have you noticed a difference in your online experience and does what Georgie's been talking about resonate with you?
From a crime prevention standpoint, a lot of what gets dismissed as just online noise. Georgie referred to people saying maybe just hop off the platform for a while. That sits on a continuum that includes genuine threats and coordinated harassment and behavior that escalates offline. So just hopping off that platform doesn't make it go away. So I don't think we should normalize, just getting off the platform as being a cost of existing in that space.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it silences women as well. It means that you lose that opportunity to have your voice amplified. Thanks so much, Hayley. And Shane, let's bring you in as well. And I'd love you to share a bit about what drove you both personally and professionally to build Social Protect.
Sure. Firstly, that argument is such nonsense, isn't it? Just turn it off. Just delete your account. Just don't be on socials. That we've got a history in society of victim blaming, and I think that's the latest side of that. You could equally argue just don't tolerate people saying those sort of horrible things and hold them accountable for what they've said. That the idea that someone would say something that they've said to Hayley to me when I was in that role, it just wouldn't happen. And we all know that that wouldn't happen. As you mentioned in the intro, we do a lot of work with sports organizations around the world, and it is categorically old white men who make the comments of if they don't want it, they just shouldn't be on the internet. And that's just an unacceptable thing to say. So I guess there's kind of two things that led me to Social Protector. The start was actually a bit different to where we ended up. I was consulting to Rugby Australia. Michael Checker, the former coach of the Wallabies, is a friend of mine. He's known for having some kind of crazy ideas about how he coaches people around the world. He decided that we should kidnap the Wallabies before the World Cup and do a military interrogation of them. Still have no idea what he was hoping to achieve out of it, but it was heaps of fun. Um, During one of those interrogations, I said to one of the players, "Is there anything on your phone that would embarrass the Wallabies or Rugby Australia if a journalist got your phone?" And the player, of course, said, "No, no, no, of course not." I said, "Okay, unlock your phone and give it to me." And then the player's face dropped, and you can imagine the type of content that was on his phone. So we started a sort of a digital cleanup for them then of let's help you better understand how vulnerable things like inappropriate pictures are and some of the behaviors that until then had just been accepted as normal. And then only about a week later, Israel Folau posted biblical scripture on social media, and I'm sure we kind of all remember the fallout from that. And so Social Protect started because we actually wanted to create a bubble around players. So in particular, an athlete would look like they were posting to social media, but it would really go into a kind of a holding cell, like a bubble, before we released it to the world. And it was actually to protect the world and sporting organizations from players posting silly things. Players hated it, as you can imagine. The idea of them having their voice silenced and having a whole range of checking on what they were posting before it went out. Not many of them were very keen for it, but it was contractually obliged in the testing process. That changed for me in 2021. My nephew was 13. He is very severely autistic. He posted some silly things on Instagram, which he would himself say are quite silly now. And his classmates came after him quite badly in the comment section, and it felt to him like his whole school was out for him. That there was this pile-on mentality in the Instagram comments, and he attempted suicide twice as a result of that. And so it was really it hit my family quite hard of what do we do? Like there's nothing that we can kind of suggest or help apart from turn it off. And as an autistic kid, he got a hell of a lot of benefit from participating in networks that he didn't feel comfortable participating in the real world. Face to face is a really difficult environment for him and still is. So it came down to that same thing of just prohibiting him from being there is not necessarily the answer. Of course, now there's law that would say he shouldn't be on there in the first place, but I'll keep my skepticism of that to myself. Um, and so, as a family, we looked at government and, why hasn't government mandated something? Why haven't they regulated or legislated or something? And then at big tech to say big tech could solve this in a heartbeat. Big tech could have created social protect years ago, and it could be embedded in all of their platforms, and they could just turn off these comments and remove the people who are making those comments in a heartbeat. They don't want to, and the really frank solution to that is they make money. They make money out of the negative commentary, and they have a moral and an ethical responsibility. They clearly don't have a legal responsibility. Now that's something the governments will need to change over time, but until that takes place, we cannot rely on corporates who make money out of misery to change their business and change their operations at huge commercial cost to themselves to keep us safe. And that's unfortunately why we exist. I'd love to go out of business soon, Sarah, but until people are nice.
Yeah, so would I. And you're right. There is just a grim reality right now, and that's why these sorts of tools are so important. So let's get into the nuts and bolts then, Shane. Tell us a bit more about getting it up and running. What are the key features, and what happens behind the scenes for you and your team for users that are facing serious or escalating threats?
I think kind of building on that last point is probably the most important thing for people to know that the platforms don't like that we exist. So we're caught in this paradigm of wanting to really be out there to say what we're doing, and at some point we're going to make it more broadly available to a much wider group of people. But the fact is, any of the platforms could turn us off overnight. We've seen that happen in reality once, where Meta turned us off as a result of not liking something that I'd said in a news release. Um, and that idea will always be a frailty of what we're doing, but it's built into the core of the system for that to take place. And I guess in designing the system, there are a couple of principles we really wanted to obey. And the first one is that you shouldn't have to give up your password. You shouldn't have to give us full access to your account in order to use a solution like this. And so that's paramount for everyone that we work with. You're not sharing your password. You're not giving us access to your account. We can't post as you. We can't read your DMs. The trade-off is that the platforms need to approve us as an app. That limits what we can do, it limits the scope of what we can do, and it limits the platforms we can work on. So, for example, Snapchat. We would love to protect people on Snapchat. They don't provide the technical hook that we can use. LinkedIn don't provide that. In fact, I was talking to LinkedIn about a year ago now and explained what we did, explained the link we need, and they said, well, abuse doesn't exist on LinkedIn, so we don't need your service. So, man, your network is pretty different to mine if you think there's no abuse on LinkedIn. Um, so that's kind of key to keeping people private but safe, and that's always going to be a trade-off of what we could do. So, for example, there's one platform, and it's Instagram, where we could protect people's DMs, where there's a particular link we could use to read DMs and then delete abusive DMs. We've made a really conscious decision to not build that into the platform because the majority of our users ask us, can the system read my DMs? And if we say yes, they say, okay, I'm not signing up.
Mm.
And then that raises a whole range of other concerns of, for example, in the sporting world, what if there's a DM that poses an integrity risk, that suggests narcotic use, that suggests something that might be doping or cheating or match fixing or something? There's an obligation on us to act on that, and then no athlete will ever engage with the platform again. So there's a really fine line for us between a user's privacy and the willingness to protect them. But something Georgie said is also the reason why we defined it the way we did, and that's looking at public comments, that it's the vicarious harm, that it's one thing to protect our users, but you've got hundreds of thousands of followers. And Georgie, it's really sad that you have scar tissue from all of the horrible comments you've read, and we see that across the board, but your followers don't. And if there's a young girl who's looking up to you to say, yeah, I want to do that one day, and then reads the comments and goes, actually, hell no, I don't. That's the worst possible outcome, right? And it normalizes that sort of engagement. So getting rid of the public commentary, I think, serves a much bigger outcome for us. DMs we certainly deal with, but we do that in a manual process. Um, the last thing I kind of flagged there, Sarah, so we've built it in a technical way. It's a mobile app. People download the app, link their accounts without giving us their password, sits quietly in the background. I think it's worth flagging that if you don't get abuse today, you have no idea what can change tomorrow. We're all a meme, a video, a comment, an out of context remark, a something from being the butt of the internet's jokes. And the story I tell about that, we onboarded Australia's Olympic athletes before the Paris Olympics, before Milano Cortina as well. One athlete in particular sat in the briefing before Paris and said, I've never received abuse online. I don't think I need something like this. They're now our most abused person ever on the platform, and I'm sure we can assume who that is. It's our breakdancing champion. And since the Paris Olympics, we've deleted 430,000 comments off her Instagram account. About 30,000 of those are death threats. One of them was her home address. So this is the type of thing that can escalate incredibly fast. So my advice to everyone, treat it like an antivirus. If you connect your accounts and it doesn't ever delete anything, brilliant. That's a great outcome for everyone, but it's there if you need it. And if things rapidly escalate, then it's going to take the trash out.
I think that's such a great framing to think of it as an antivirus. I think that's something everyone understands and knows. And as you said, I mean, you think of ray gun and that just shifted within a 24-hour period, really, didn't it? So, yeah,
Even while she was performing, the comments started rolling in.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're very glad that whilst it's been for difficult personal reasons, but also drawing on such an amazing background that you decided that this was needed and created. So thank you to you and your team. And I know, Hayley, you were somewhat involved as well in the early days. Hayley, clearly you've spent your whole career helping people stay safe. What would you tell the Pathways alum listening tonight who are thinking about stepping into public life about protecting themselves, both online and offline as well?
I think Shane's done a nice lead in for me there, thinking about, insurance policies and things. I always liken everything to protective security. So most people, unless they live in the country, will lock their house when they leave it. They'll lock their car. You shut windows. You do natural things. You put up fences. None of these things prevent things from happening, but they slow it down. They deter, threat actors and things. Now we have to think of ourselves in the same way. um, you know, Firstly, we need to separate your security posture from your sense of self. A lot of people, don't want to think about themselves in those circumstances, but we really do need to if we're thinking of entering public life. The world has changed. Things are much faster. It's easier for people to find people. Even the way that we show up online and the choices we make around what we show about our personal lives. Our politicians are asked to show a lot, I'm sure, by the parties as well, and as part of, who they are and what their persona is and things like that. But with each of those decisions becomes a risk point, I guess, and you have to do risk assessments around that. So I would say lock down the practical stuff early before you need to. So rather than scrambling after an incident or after it's commenced or after your address has been made publicly available, and that means auditing before you step into public life what's publicly discoverable about you and your family, tightening your personal accounts and being deliberate about what you share in real time versus after the fact. I made a recommendation to my cohort, to when they're creating their, LinkedIn, their social media, their Instagram, their Facebook, etc., for running, that they do it on a separate device, that they don't do it on the same device as their personal accounts. Things like the way that your contacts are interconnected with, Facebook and WhatsApp and all those things, where it starts suggesting people to you that you've connected with in a business setting on your Facebook account and things. It's kind of uncomfortable in those spaces because things can go south very quickly, as we've just discussed. Second, decide well in advance what you will and won't engage with, and don't make that decision in the heat of the moment when you're upset. So, tools like Social Protect exist precisely so you're not the one absorbing the worst of it, as it's happening. You are able to. That's what I love about the way Shane's designed it, is that quarantine zone, allows it to be collected, for evidentiary purposes, but also so that you are not like feeling it in a moment where you have no control over, being able to action it or do something about it. Um, and third, and this is the one people skip, so documenting and reporting, which the Social Protect app is doing, but also in real life as well. So what feels like a one-off to you may be part of a pattern that authorities and platforms can act on, but only if there's a record. So don't talk yourself out of treating something seriously because you're worried about looking dramatic. This is something I teach to women and have been for over a decade now. Um, when Shane and I did our training back in the Intel service, we had to read a book. I don't know if you did, Shane, but we had to read Gavin de Becker, The Gift of Fear. And I recommend it to all women. All women should read this book. It will make you not sleep well for a couple of nights, but then, you know, the long-term benefits are there. So his core argument, Gavin de Becker, who's done close personal protection and things over many, many years, his core argument is that intuitive fear is a signal, not a weakness, and your brain has often picked up on a real threat before you've consciously processed it. And the mistake that women in particular are socialized into is overriding that signal so we don't seem rude, paranoid, or dramatic. We're told from very little girls, you're being dramatic, oh, it doesn't matter. And that's built into our systems. I try to teach women to actually lean into our intuition. It is there to protect us. And this book helps you kind of explore that within yourself. You know, two lessons stick with me. And first, it's persistence isn't sincerity. So someone who won't accept no online or in person is telling you who they are, really. And second, no is a complete sentence. You don't owe anyone an explanation for declining contact. So that interaction where your intuition kicks in and it makes the, you know, hair on the back of your neck stand up. Don't argue yourself out of it. Document it, report it, and act on it. Your discomfort is data. You know, don't let anyone tell you that's not evidence. It is. You know, you're not in a litigation sense, but it certainly does develop a picture and imagery and may protect the next person as well. And just finally, this is not something that you have to carry alone or quietly. I think, you know, in Georgie's case, you know, she did all the right things and reaching out, you know, certainly isn't a weakness, it's a strength. It's a good security practice to let other people know that these things are happening. You know, if something goes, Shane and I, you know, sometimes, you know, I'd send him a text and saying, you know, I'm doing this thing just in case something happens, you know that this is what's like preluded it. And, you know, people understanding those things can be the difference between ultimately somebody being held accountable for their actions or not.
Amazing. So practical. I really appreciate all of that guidance, Hayley. Is there anything else, Shane or Georgie, that you wanted to add in terms of protecting yourself online or offline?
I'd just add in that you don't owe anyone anything. Just because you're in the public light, they don't get a free access to you and everything that's personal to you. That's not part of the value proposition here. So if you choose to block someone, to not give them access to your accounts, to whatever it is, that's entirely on you. And you know, your safety comes before anything else. The other thing, you know, Social Protect is built as a shield. What we don't talk about all that often is the sword part of that, and that's the bit I like the most. We'll go after the people who are giving you a hard time, and we're not doing that with alum, but it's something that we're looking at doing in the future. So, for example, in the last week, I was in London working with the Premier League, and they've put in place an agreement with us that anyone who crosses a certain threshold, and that's a particular level of racism or hatred or vitriol or threat, we're going to identify those people, and there's going to be consequences for them. And that can range from they're not ever attending a game again to criminal action to whatever else. At a starting point, when we started engaging with the WNBA in the US, they asked us to reply to abusers through the Social Protect account on platforms and say, hey, this is your one warning, do this again, and we're going to report you to law enforcement. Candidly, 99% of those people replied to us almost instantly with F off, you don't know who I am. And so we sent them their name and home address, and those people would delete their accounts in record time. In one case, we worked with a law enforcement agency in the US, and the guys turned on the front camera of this abuser's phone and took a photo of him and sent him the photo and said, this is who you are. He scrambled like the coward that he was as quickly as possible. So I think it's important if someone is threatening you, if someone is really putting something that really violates any you know, tolerance code that you have, as Hayley said, take action. And if that's referring it to eSafety Commissioner, referring it to the police, even if nothing happens, that builds a picture of who that person is. And we can do something about it. If eSafety and police aren't doing anything, reach out to us. I'd love to take the fight back to those scumbags.
Mm. I guess this is where there's real teeth behind Social Protect, and that's based, I think, really on your deep expertise and being able to do that. Georgie.
I was just going to say my one bit of advice that I always give women stepping into public life is it's similar to what Hayley said. It's not to question yourself or let anyone diminish how it feels. And I'm absolutely guilty of that as well. I'm really good at giving other people advice and then not taking it myself. And often people see, I've actually showed a few people the app and they can go in and sort of read what is coming through to me in real time. And I believe Social Protect for me, since I just reinstalled it, it disconnected for a while and I had to reinstall a few months ago, and it's already deleted like 11,000 comments in that time. And it's often not until people really, I guess, validate it to me or point it out to me just how much of a heavy burden this is to carry and the impact that, it has not just on me, but the people around me, that I really actually realize the severity of it. Because like I said, it's wrong, but you become immune to it. But then there's also this part of yourself that thinks, oh, maybe I'm overreacting or I shouldn't make such a big deal of it. And I feel like that every single time I talk about online gendered violence and sexist abuse, and I would never say it to anyone else. So I always tell women who are going into this, because I often receive the feedback that Shane mentioned that makes me incredibly upset. And probably it's the worst part of all of this is young women and girls looking at what I do and wanting to do the same thing and thinking that they couldn't possibly do it because they couldn't endure the criticism and, the abuse that I receive. And I just think if people are able to take it seriously and to speak out and to not let anyone else feel like it's something that you should put up with. And it's a really sort of unfortunate problem and reality of politics where there's too many politicians who only care when this happens to someone on their own team. And I make a really concerted effort, which is why I wrote that opinion piece about Jacinta Allen, who is someone that I have fiercely opposed at times and has made many decisions that have upset me personally and professionally. But I know that no matter who is experiencing this, that it's not just about what is happening to them as an individual, even though that's wrong and has impact. It's about the broader cultural problem and what it results in. And so I always tell people, take it seriously, but also take it seriously when it happens to other people, and don't pick and choose when this is wrong, because we will never get past this as a society until we reject it wholeheartedly. And doing that is not an endorsement of someone's politics. It's showing opposition to violence against women and girls. And, we know what this escalates into if it's not addressed.
And silencing your voice, it's unacceptable that someone thinks they can silence your voice. Georgie, you're at 51,000 total. I was just looking before, which is,
and that was with like a couple of months disconnected when I had an outage. Yeah. And the ability for people to hide behind online accounts, but hide anonymous accounts now, and get away with things like this. Obviously, we need platforms to take some sort of responsibility. As Shane mentioned, they don't want to, but at the very least, we can ensure that it doesn't stop us from, doing our advocacy and speaking about the things we care about, because that's fundamentally bad for democracy when women pull away from public life because of stuff like this.
I think it's one of the greatest threats to democracy around the world right now is women retreating because of these experiences. And, I'm so glad that you do choose to be a voice that not only speaks up about it in terms of your own experience, but that you're doing that across party lines. And, that really reflects the ethos of Pathways to Politics, and what we're trying to create here is that we, Hayley talked about this in her graduation speech about this community having each other's backs on the hard days. And so we wanted to have this conversation as an expression of that. I'm aware we've got about 10 minutes left, so I would love to open this up for a few questions from those watching. And yes, please do use the raised hand function. And I think hopefully
Sarah, can I just throw in one more
of course, please do.
quick point before that? And it's something that Georgie raised. That Facebook was really untenable for her, and we've seen across the board that X is clearly the worst. Like it blows everything out of the water, and nothing's even close to X. In fact, we did some analysis, and if every X user connected to Social Protect, we'd delete 42% of the platform. So that kind of says something. But Facebook is a very close second, and there's nothing close to the two of them. Instagram is a long way down. TikTok is by far the lowest. But I think that's something that people should also be aware of when they choose where to engage. And what encourages us a little bit is the demographics of Facebook, that it tends to be older people who are on Facebook, TikTok tends to be exactly the opposite, younger people who are using it. So hopefully this is a phenomenon that is starting to die out as the miserable old farts who are making these comments start to die out. Yeah, we'll see.
I hope you were right. I'm not going to hold my breath. We'll wait and see.
No,
But I
no,
think it
we'll
is
see.
really important to know which of the platforms that perhaps are going to be the more challenging spaces. And, you know, if there are opportunities to do more on those other platforms like TikTok, then that's where you potentially can spend your effort. Okay, let's go to some questions now. Antoinette, you're first.
I sure do. Take out the mechanism, the vector for the abuse coming through. If this was happening in person, if someone was coming into your electoral office and saying this, or coming into Parliament House and saying this, there's an obligation on your employer to protect you from that sort of abuse, from threatening behavior. The vector doesn't matter, right? That there is absolutely a requirement for that. That's actually what has mobilized most of the organizations that we work with to partner with us. CEOs often don't care about the kind of personal mental health side of it because they don't receive it themselves. They struggle to kind of relate to that. But when we say, if one of your players, if one of your people is deeply affected by this, you're their employer. It's your obligation to protect them. That kind of makes sense to them in a workplace safety setting. So the parties absolutely should be. We haven't had a discussion with any of the parties about it.
Well, I'll add something there too. When you look at CEOs and things in the private sector who received death threats, a good example was after October 7. A lot of Jewish CEOs within the Australian community and abroad received a lot of direct death threats. And so we were engaged in a lot of circumstances to do physical threat assessments of the offices and their homes and the way they were traveling to work and things like that. Now, if that's the response from the private sector for their CEOs, shouldn't the response be the same to persistent, threats to politicians? I mean, truly, the physical safety response should be in lockstep with that.
I just tack something onto that. Certainly, in my experience, obviously, I'm in a party, but I'm the only representative in Victoria, and something that I always make really clear to people, and this should not be the reason for not doing it. First and foremost, like it should be about safety, but there is this fear, I think, from a lot of politicians that installing social protect will reduce their engagement or limit interaction with their
Yeah.
page, and even if it's not positive, the more comments that they're getting and the more reactions they're getting, that is increasing their profile and the message they're trying to deliver. And I think that has created a bit of hesitancy around doing something about it. And it's actually a question that I asked Shane myself because, my engagement was quite high. And even though a lot of it was negative, I was worried that it could impact my profiles or result in them sort of being bumped down the feed. And ultimately, the work that I'm trying to do not being seen. My experience has been the opposite. Like I said, because I have installed this software and the comments section has changed, I really noticed how many people were choosing not to engage with me or publicly declare their support because they were fearful of doing so. And I think that's important for parties to know as well.
Mm.
Again, in politics, I think often considerations like this comes last, which is disappointing, but making those points clear is a really important part of it. But also, I just think safety across the board when it comes to politicians is far too partisan. And like I already touched on this before, but we need to care about when it happens to everyone. But the protection of parliamentarians in our country, particularly state politics and at the local level, is really lacking. And I don't think we are prepared for what could come as a result of that. I mean, I get a lot of sort of death threats and comments wishing harm upon me, and the only way that I actually can take action on them is not because state politicians have any protection, but because my partner is actually a federal MP and I'm considered a family member and they have coverage by the federal police. So I think that monitoring the online space is actually a really important first step into the work that we need to do in the physical space, and I would really hate for that only to change because of a result of an incident. So that's
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
I'm constantly talking about as well. And there's a lot of parties that put protections in place, but only for their own people. And that's not the solution.
Georgie,
I
the stats across the board support your experience as well. So across all of our users, engagement has gone up by an average of 30%. using Social Protect. So that's not unique to you. And a lot of athletes have that same view that their sponsors are engaged with them because of their engagement rates. And if they start deleting hate, they're worried that they'll start to lose those endorsements. It's not the case. There's a whole range of people who are wanting to engage and sometimes criticize and even be negative, but not be abusive to you. And they don't, because they don't want all of that hatred to transfer onto them. So, it's an important part of growing your profile, not the opposite.
Mm. And I think that duty of care, as you say, whether it sits with the parties or with the parliament themselves and the local councils, I think it is something that needs to be addressed. And it's something I've talked a lot about in sort of both the national and international forums. I think the review of the Online Safety Act started to touch on some of this, and sort of the fact that it's not joined up. We're not looking at online and in-person safety in a connected way enough at the moment. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that space. And really isn't being done very well in many parts of the world. And that's been quite eye-opening for me as I've been searching for solutions and better ways for doing this. I think, like many things around the online space, we just haven't kept pace with what's developed and provided the support mechanisms around that. Right, we've got 2 more questions to go and not much time. So, Prakrithi, over to you.
So we have in Social Protect, we have a category of keywords called spam and scams, and that's engineered towards trolling, but also bot-like activities. So I'm sure you've probably seen the sex bots that are pretty rife on Instagram, the comments of like, I'm feeling lonely tonight, and then it's pornography that's in the captions or in the links. Um, we stay ahead of that. So we have systems that are in place constantly scanning what those bots are posting, grabbing that content and adding it into the keywords tab. Some of our users choose to not have that enabled, and that again is every user can customize what their experience is and what's turned on and what's turned off. Um, Trolling is one of those things that often can lead to other poor behavior online. So it's up to you whether you allow that or don't allow it. But Social Protect has the built-in capability of removing it in the same way. And if those same people choose to engage in a constructive way, even if they're negative or critical, the post stays. So we're not blocking them. We're just removing posts or comments they make that are harmful. So yeah, I mean, I'd encourage removal of that sort of stuff when it's done, just to try and incite a response from you. I mean, that's not particularly helpful from anyone.
And thanks, Hayley, for responding to some of the questions in the chat. So if you're happy to keep going with, I can see there's another one there if you might be able to answer that, or Shane.
But
And
Olivia,
then,
you don't have to check it all.
right,
It's
don't
up
have
to
to check
you
the
whether you
messages.
read them or
Yeah,
not.
yeah. And last question, Georgina, over to you.
This is actually a really good question because I actually very rarely block people now because of Social Protect. I don't really see it as something that I need to do, and I feel good about that because, like I said earlier on, I actually really believe in people's right to disagree with me and to criticize me for my decision making and my policies and the things that I say and do that's in line with what my actual job is, not how I look or my past or, how I parent, which has been sort of actually the really distinct new form of misogyny that I'm experiencing, which just goes to show it's never about, the actual issue they're saying. It's about the fact that I'm a woman and they'll always find a way to do it. I don't block people for that reason, because I know that I have a tool in place where if they're saying something that is harmful or abusive, it's going to be picked up anyway. And if you have a look at my social media, there's a lot of people who will say things to me within the realms of what is acceptable and not picked up by Social Protect. And I let that stay there because I think it's important that they have their say. And that I feel like because of the existence of this tool not being known to many politicians, often the response is to just block people because it makes it easier. Yep. Like I mentioned before, a lot of us are putting resources into managing this stuff, and there is probably a too quick of a response to just say, well, I'm just going to remove that person from my page, or else I'm just going to keep commenting, and I don't have the ability to moderate that. And they see it as a perceived, I guess, future risk that could come up. I also have a disclosure pinned to the top of my Facebook that says that I use this tool, because the other thing that happens to me regularly is people will say, why did you delete my comment? And, where'd my comment go? And you're, shutting down conversation on your page. And, half the time they've called me like a dumb slut or something. And of course, social protectors picked up on that, and then they're offended by it. So I think it's getting the balance right of, being really open about what you are willing to talk about and what's not acceptable, and having that clearly defined on your page. I know a lot of MPs do that. And I think if we allow sort of more people to have access to tools like this that helps protect their online safety, we'll hopefully see less of that, I guess, transparency or shutting down of conversations, because there is, like I said, a real fear of the ability to moderate them, to make sure they stay safe. And the easiest response is to just stop them altogether, which is obviously not a good thing when we largely live out our political lives in the online and digital space now. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think the other thing I'd add, Georgie, is that your space is your space. It's your page, your posts are entirely up to you to how you moderate it. And in fact, there's legal precedent in Australia that you can be held liable for anything criminal that takes place in your comment section. So it's up to you to manage what that looks like. And we face this argument a lot working in the US. So for example, freedom of speech is such a categoric thing in the US that there's a lot of counter argument for, well, you just have to tolerate hatred. That's what you have to handle. But you don't. So people can say whatever they want about Georgie on their own page. What she's saying is you can't say it on hers. This is her turf, and it's up to her to manage what her page looks like. And the equivalent we use in the US is, in your front yard, if someone wants to come and put up a billboard with a swastika on it, it's up to you to take that down if you don't want it to be in your yard. It's your turf, your yard. If they want to put it up in theirs, there's consequences for them on their page, but that's a matter for them. So you don't have to put up with it just because you're an MP. That's I don't think an acceptable argument.
Well, this has been such an amazing conversation. So just in closing, I wanted to finish with another quote from Georgie from the article. When women are driven out of political participation, we are all poorer for it as a society. So tonight is one answer to that: practical tools that really work and a community that has your back. Lara's going to put in the chat the access code for Social Protect, and we'll put it in the follow-up email as well. So strongly encourage you to think about it as an antivirus. Download the app, connect your accounts. It'll only take you 5 minutes. I'm so grateful to this panel for your really thoughtful and practical advice. Thank you for making the time, for being here, and thanks to all of the audience as well. Have a great night.